Hello and welcome to Planting Joy Gardens.
Welcome to Planting Joy Gardens. I'm going to finish up with replanting my garden after the time away. So I'm getting things back in order and I'm also filling out those blank spots. So today I am going to be sowing some carrots and also some collard greens. So let's get started. So this is a summer sowing of carrots. Normally you would sow them early spring. It takes about 77 days from germination to harvest. It is the warm month, so the big focus is to keep them moist until they actually germinate. And then after that, you just have to make sure that you have plenty of sun. So I'm going to show you some of the tricks I use to make sure that the soil stays moist until germination. So tip number one, start with very moist soil. I'm using pelleted seeds here, so that'll help me with spacing. Generally, if the seeds are not pelleted, I just kind of broadcast and thin later. But because these are pelleted, I move the soil off to the side. The planting depth is a 1/4 inch to roughly a 1/2 inch. Okay, so spacing is easier with pelleted seeds. Pelleted seeds have a hard time germinating if they're old. So I will put like 2 or 3 seeds per spot. And I will continue, even though they're pelleted, I will sow them densely. Because it's never a problem to thin carrots. It's no fun, but when you're working in a container, it's a lot easier. So I will show you what it looks like. So some of them have 1 seed, some of them have multiple seeds. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. I spaced it out as much as I possibly could. The pelleted seeds are pink in color. So if they're too close, you can always find them and move them. And you know, these are basically top sowed. Okay. And so what I'll do is grab a little soil from the side. Part of the problem with carrots is you tend to push them too deep when you water. That's why I say you start off with very moist soil and just barely cover it. And I'm just making sure I have good contact with the seed. So 1/4 inch to about a 1/2 inch. And I do apologize, I'm not great with camera skills. Okay, so now that these are planted, and these are the imperators, so they tend to be um, longer carrots. They also tend not to be the really hairy carrots, and they grow nice and straight and smooth if you place them in loose soil. So this soil is very loose. I harvested potatoes from here. So the next thing I will do to ensure that my carrots get light but retain moisture is I'm going to cover them with a solid sheet of plastic. So this is going to keep the humidity and moisture in. It could take anywhere from 7 to 14 days for germination. So I have my imperator carrots planted. So now let's spin around so we can work on the collards. Okay, so I'm at my green stock. Instead of putting carrots here, I decided since this is a leafy green tower, I'm going to add collards, my July collards, to this green stalk. Now think about collards, and the seed packet uh, kind of indicates that, we've talked about soil temperatures before. You really have to have warm soil. I'm growing in a cooler climate. I'm zone 5B6A. So that means July for me. And collards are long standing, so I can grow them in July, August, September. Now, when the nights get cool, as long as your collards are mature, they will do just fine in the cooler months. So that's something to keep in mind. You start your collards in the heat and you take them through the cool. And this green stalk has a frost cover, so I can keep them going even longer because I do have a way of protecting them. But I want them well established before the cool temperature. So they need to germinate in warm, warm soil. And just to see the size of the seeds, typical size for leafy greens. Collards are big plants, so I tend to just sow maybe 3 seeds in a pocket and then later, much like I do with the Swiss chard. They transplant. So this lower level has one. I have another empty pocket here where the chard, I think I had mustard in there and I neglected to replant it with chard. So collards it'll be. They're small seeds, so 1/4 inch is plenty. Even an 1/8 inch would be fine. So I have collards in here. Now my top layer is empty, so I'm going to add collard seeds to the top there. Okay, so same thing, very small seeds. I'm going to put 2 seeds per hole, 4 total seeds in the pocket. So in actuality, I will thin down to 1 plant per pocket. And I'm going to plant up all of these pockets for collards. I had some old tags where I had mustards and tatsoi and everything else. And so 2 per hole. I'm sewing them at 1/4 inch. And the goal is to make sure that the soil stays moist and warm. This time of year, warmth is not a problem, but because I have these on the top row of my green stalk, I can definitely water them. So I know that this top row is going to need watering, extra watering until it germinates. So I can use the traditional water here for all the things that are already established. But for the new seeds, I will just water the pockets directly. Okay, so we got the seeds in. And although I started with really moist soil, I'm just going to add a little extra moisture because these are newly planted seeds. This bottom layer. So thank you for joining me as I reestablish my garden. When you have a small kitchen garden to work with, one of the things you have to pay attention to is always have your garden full of plants, always have something ready to go in when something comes out. So thank you so much for joining me in the garden. I have my collard greens filling up the empty spaces of my green stalk. And I have my carrots, my imperator carrots, waiting to germinate. So they're planted here for the best possible chance of germination, moisture, and light. And I will have to wait. I'm going to try to give these potatoes another week, maybe two, to die back before I harvest those. So come back so that you can see me harvest my experiment, which was high density potato planting. I also plan to be harvesting out some of these bigger onions here. So come back so that you can see the progress I'm making in my small kitchen garden. So I took just a little time just to get my garden back in order after time away from it. And it wasn't a big, huge task. I had to fertilize, I had to harvest, and I had to replant things that died back. I didn't want empty spaces, but I didn't have a lot of problems with weeds. I had someone water for me. I told them water the base of the plants, don't water anything that does not have a plant in it. So I didn't have a lot of problems with weed in my pathway here because it's heavily mulched, and I asked them not to get water in my pathways and just keep the water where it needs to be. For one thing, it conserves water, and it meant that I didn't have to come back to a major weeding project. And they took pretty good care of my beds for me. They watered, they did not harvest. So because I am using raised beds and containers, I didn't have a lot of weed problems. So keep those gardens going. I know it's the end of July, heading into August. For some of you, it's extremely hot. For others, this is the peak season where we're actually starting to get warm enough temperatures to see things grow. Thank you so much for joining me in the garden. Have an amazing day.